Good to go.
Good afternoon. Welcome back, or welcome to Senate Education Thursday, March 16th, 2:17 p.m. We went a little longer on the floor than expected. We have one piece of business to work on today, and that is an act relating to school safety. And this is something that we have looked at and pulled apart over the past 3-4 weeks now, on again, off again. And I think one of the things, a couple things to sort of set the table before we pass it on to Ledge Council is, I think what everybody knows, the intention of the bill, and we may even add a little bit of intention to it, Ms. St. James.
In the 10th section?
In 10th section. I think we want to put in there somewhere that this is indeed, these would be steps to help enhance public safety or school safety, just so somebody picks up this bill, they know that, you know, what the intent of the bill is. And that could be a line or two that we could look at, I would think that hopefully we'll wrap this up sometime tomorrow, and just vote something out, I would hope. So with that, so that's the intent generally. I know we've been talking about it. The part that we're going to hear from people on, I believe we have general consensus from emails and from testimony. I think we have an understanding of general consensus, but anybody in the room can always correct me if I'm wrong, on the first 3 sections. So that would be fire and emergency preparedness drills, requiring emergency operation plans, and as well as access control and visitor management policies. So, and I'm not speaking for everybody on the committee, I'm just saying, with our witnesses so far, I think we have heard that those first 3 sections, generally we've heard there's approval on. Where we get into more complicated territory, or some concerns, I would say, have to do with section 4, behavioral threat assessment teams. And if you're looking at the most recent draft, committee members may recall there were a couple of changes and recommended changes that we made prior to town meeting week, as well as one that I made on behalf of Senator Gulick's comment prior to town meeting week around bias training. And so we'll start with having Ledge Council just take us through those changes. And then I think we'll just hear from our witnesses and hear what people have to say. I did write to our chair of judiciary, just saying that this may be something that they might want to have a look at when it's finished, and so that's also a possibility. They may not take it in, but they might just have a conversation. They might just have a review. So with that, Ms. St. James, section 4, please.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel, section 4. So the most recent draft is draft 7.1 with the date of 3/6 on the top. Everyone. Okay. So section 4 appears on page 4. It begins on line 12. And the first change since the last time we walked through this language is on line 19, and that is a requirement that in addition to receiving annual training in best practices of conducting behavioral threat assessments, a behavioral threat assessment team shall also receive bias training.
Now I just put in Senator Gulick as a placeholder based on some of the conversations that we had prior to. Yes.
So is bias training already established as far as what it encompasses?
It's a very good question. Is there some kind of, when we think about just training in general, to me, something about sexual harassment training, I don't know if there's not anything in statute that would say this is the best way to do it, but I think there would be an understanding if you are in the field what bias training would consist of, but we could pull that apart a little bit.
I'm just saying that there's something already established.
Right.
We look at it, because if you don't, you're going to get 50 different variants.
Yeah, and I think there'd be variation when I think about the sexual harassment training that senators and other members go through early on. I bet it varies, legislature to legislature throughout the United States, school to school a little bit, but are there any general guidelines that would be covered in that I can look into?
Is I would say that there's no definition for bias training, certainly in this section.
Right.
This is a wide open term.
Yeah.
That's used here.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, we're gonna move to page 5, subsection C. So we're still in the behavioral threat assessment team section.
And Ms. St. James, I apologize for interrupting, but while we're on that bias training, maybe what we'll work on is some language that would say, as well as bias training, which would include X, Y, and Z. And that's something I can think of and others can think of as well, just to make sure that we capture that a little bit.
Just a recommendation. I like your idea, but I sense that somewhere within the state employee training portfolio, there must be a bias training. No?
I don't, as a former executive branch employee, I can't testify in front of you, but I don't know the answer to that. Certainly, DHR could weigh in on that, the Department of Human Resources, but the state does have an Office of Equity and Inclusion. And I would suggest they would be the best place if you're looking for a state response on what's already required of state employees. And similarly, they would be the best to hear from, or an option to hear from, I should say that.
So I agree with the chairman. The language is fine. It's Senator Williams' point. There's 1,000 solutions, and I think if there's already one in the state,
Let's use it. Let's point to it. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say definitely consult with the Office of Equity. But then really, I think we're gonna have to discuss, you want districts to be able to choose their own training. There are online versions, there are in-person versions, et cetera. So do we want that, or do we want one standard for everybody? That would be the question.
So in your experience with school districts and things, you think it varies district to district around these kinds of different trainings?
It can be delivered in so many different ways.
Yeah.
I think maybe the Office of Equity can shed light on some best practices.
Thank you.
Page 5, subsection C, line 1. For students on an individual education, I believe that should be program.
And not plan.
I think so. I always, you know, to be very honest with you,
Sure.
I
Listen,
almost never get it right the first time, and so perhaps this will be the time that it sticks. But I will correct that. A behavioral threat assessment shall not replace the manifestation determination review process required under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's the federal citation for that act. And the Agency of Education Pupils Rule 4313. For students who are not eligible for special education services, but who are or may be qualified individuals with disabilities under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, a behavior threat assessment shall not replace the manifestation determination review process required under Agency of Education Pupils Rule 4312. This section was meant to address some testimony you heard that there's already the manifestation determination process, review process that's outlined in federal law under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as for students on an IEP, as well as State Board of Education rules. And then for students who are not on an IEP, but who, I think the language directly from the rule is, are not eligible for special education services, but who are or may be qualified individuals with disabilities under Section 504. The State Board of Education already has a process spelled out. And so this is basically saying, if you're one of those individuals, a behavior threat assessment does not replace the requirements that are already either in federal law or state law, or both. Want me to keep going?
unless I see a question, you can always, I know your testimony on these sections as well.
And then in subsection D, annually each supervisory union, supervisory district, and approved independent school shall report data related to completion of and outcomes of all behavioral threat assessments and manifestation determination reviews. So I think previously it was just behavioral threat assessments, so we're tweaking in manifestation determination reviews. And then there's the data that you want reported. And since the last time we walked through this language on line 20, there's an inclusion of some additional categories of race, gender, disability status, and eligibility for free or reduced price school meals. And then on page 6, an additional piece of data asking to be collected is the number of students subjected to more than one behavioral threat assessment or manifestation determination review. And this would all be information that would be reported to the agency of education, not the legislature. And that's it.
Does anybody have any questions before we hear from our witnesses? Oh, Senator Hashim.
Yeah, I have a question that was given to me today by a constituent, the individual who runs the Putney School. And this is related to, let me just find it again in the, I believe it's on page 4, line 6. So the Putney School is a place where there's several barn sites, and the students there do a lot of agricultural stuff. And the director is concerned about the requirement of having to keep these facilities constantly locked. And I did mention to him, though, that, you know, that this bill is kind of at the end stage right now, and we have to get it out before crossover, and that, you know, this could potentially be worked on by the other body. But is it correct to say that barn structures that are used a school will also have to remain locked throughout the day?
Good question. And I'm just thinking our middle school has a greenhouse. We've got little barns in a lot of our different public and independent schools.
So the language you have in front of you just says school sites, and then it's a little more specific when we're talking about central offices, district offices. It's a little less ambiguous. But the language is pretty broad, and so I can see arguments on both sides of school sites. You know, a more it's a relatively ambiguous term when we're talking about outbuildings, if you will, greenhouses, barns. If you want them to be swept in, I would encourage you to be specific about that, including extra buildings such as, and if you want them to be excluded, I would encourage, and you're worried about a lot of back and forth over whether they need to be included, I would include you to be specific about that. But all school sites, I would say as now, I think that it's possible that there could be two different interpretations of that. So I would look to the intent behind the proposed language.
That's a very good question. But I think maybe would be best for now, just so we can get to the witnesses, if it works for you, Senator Hashim, if you want to work a little bit on, I'm not averse to having the conversation before it leaves here. You want to propose some language later today or tomorrow that might get to your constituents' concern. We can certainly entertain it as a committee. And it will likely, you may have a little bit of a preview of this in judiciary as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, I did write to Senator Sears just indicating that this feels a little bit like some of the work we did on, I don't know if everybody will remember that we worked on driver's ed yesterday. And that seemed to overlap a little bit with transportation, same kind of thing, maybe give a little walkthrough. So you might even do it there as well, Senator Hashim. Oh, happy to entertain it.
Yeah, I'll speak with my constituent if I can get a hold of him before we adjourn today, and then and if I don't hear from him in the next hour or so, I'll just come back tomorrow with some potential language.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks, Ms. St. James. Ms. Garces. Thank you. How are you?
I'm great, how are you?
Good.
Okay.
Do you have written testimony?
I will send it to you afterwards.
Okay, you don't want us to read it first?
No.
Okay.
I will read it to you.
Thanks and welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Amanda. For the record, my name is Amanda Garces, Director of Policy Education Outreach, and the for the Vermont Human Rights Commission. So thank you, and I don't know where the camera is.
Oh, Senator Hashim is right there.
Senator
Yeah,
Hashim.
He's waving back.
So thank you again for having me. I am sorry that I didn't send this to you earlier. It kind of came and I was like, wow, what's happening? So I want to just say that my work is multi-issue, and among others, I work to support communities in conversations around discrimination, harassment, systemic disparities in the education system. And with that work, and in 2020, amidst our national reckoning around the police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we started conversations about police in schools, and with the hopes of redefining the way that we use safety in our education systems that can lead to ending the barriers that our Black and Brown youth have, and also our youth with disabilities. The Vermont Police, with Police Out of Schools Coalition includes Vermont Legal Aid, Vermont Human Rights Commission, Outright Vermont, Neighborhoods for a Safer St. Albans, Rights and Democracy, Youth for Change, the Root Social Justice Center, ACLU Vermont, Rutland County and WCP, and the Education Justice College of Vermont. So it's a breadth around the state of communities working on the ground.
So Ms. Garcia, just to confirm, are you representing that group today?
I am one of the members,
One of the
but I
members,
am
okay,
here
it's
with the
not-
Human
you're not
Rights
the umbrella,
Commission.
okay, okay.
Exactly. We're not the umbrella, it's a
Yeah, all right.
coalition that is broad, but that with having the same conversation.
Thank you.
This feels like a step backward, not forward. We are concerned about the behavioral threat assessment teams delineated in the safety bill. A new report that I believe Rachel Siegel came and testified and shared a lot of information with you. It's called the K-12 Threat Assessment Processes, Civil Rights Impacts. Kind of details a little bit about what happens with these teams nationwide. This document highlights the negative impacts on the civil rights of Black and Brown youth. The process of threat assessments can lead to the over-policing and criminalizations of students of color, which can result in disproportionate disciplinary action, including suspension. And the way that the report is written, it just has a lot of issues around transparency, which is one of the issues nationwide. Overall, this report emphasizes the need for policymakers to rethink the way that we look at assessment processes, to take into account the civil rights implications for students of color, which we know in our state, we have been going forward to support them, and this will take us forward. In light of the findings of this report and the many, it is imperative that we take a closer look at this, at the way that the report is written. You talked a little bit about adding the implicit bias training, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about around that. As the Vermont Human Rights Commission, we do a lot of implicit bias training, 500 interventions trainings. We're about to roll out a new program called Let's Talk Race. Yes.
Yeah, let's just, I just want to only just recognize that we're a little bit, we're not at quite the 11th hour,
Okay.
but what I'm trying to get a sense of early is for you and your organizations, I don't want to just pull in one thing if the goal is to strip the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Okay,
So that's,
good.
so you just
Good.
kind of tell me,
Yeah.
if you could start with what your
I-
goal, what your
thank you.
amendment would be, and then we can kind of go back to it. Great,
Great,
thank you.
thank you. So yes, we are asking you to take it off the bill.
Section 4.
Section 4. And so here's the way that when we're looking at the behavioral threat assessment management, the report, that guidance that is written for the Agency of Education, we're looking at adding school resource officers as part. These school resource officers will help with critical data collection, particularly social media, identify concurrent safety concerns in the community, provide information regarding prior involvement with law enforcement, assist in conducting interviews in subjects, targets, witness, teachers, staff, parents, students, things that, over and over we say are not really good. School resource officers have a 40-hour training when our trauma-informed counselors have to go to school and master's degree, right? There's a big difference about how we're looking at safety and who provides that safety for our students, and who do they call when they are having problems at home.
So and just to confirm.
Yeah.
Only because we're kind of
Yes,
on the move.
yes.
So you're saying remove section 4, but what are you speaking to right
I am
now?
speaking at that you have adding threat assessment teams.
Yeah.
And then there's a guidance at the Agency of Education.
Yeah,
That specifies what those are and go into detail,
Right.
including the fact that there's a lot of problems around civil rights issues within that document
Yeah.
as it's based. So by you
Okay.
adding, you're kind of codifying the guidance in that, because that's what people are gonna be using.
I
right?
see. Yeah.
So that is the big problem, is like, is it the right time for you to have this conversation when a guidance is there that we need to have, rethink how we're engaging the families, that this will impact more. I appreciate and love the intent that we need our safety schools.
Right.
Our teachers are asking for it, we wanna, but they also are asking for more mental health resources
Yeah.
for their students and for their classrooms. So this is kind of not aligning with what they're asking either. So that's, I'm gonna cede my time because I know that Paul was here and Rachel is also gonna testify, and they can talk more about all of those impacts that I said. And so I just wanna radiate that we are here because we really want the safety of our school system. That includes our teachers, that includes our students. But that also includes the way that we look at civil rights and human rights in that.
absolutely. So, I'm trying to think. Ms. Garces, are you thinking that there's a need to replace section 4 with anything? Anything that's sort of out, now, of course, we're not going to, because this is just about the end of it. We're not gonna go into getting rid of school resource. I mean, we don't have the time to take a lot of testimony on something, but is there something in there or that you're thinking about that we should be doing? Of course, in other committees, as you know, even from last year's ARPA funds, the amount of mental health stuff that we allocated to schools, you know, what schools are doing right now with wraparound services. As it relates to school safety, is there anything else? Because one of the things, and I'm just gonna be completely frank, because it is a worry of mine.
Yeah.
Because just somebody in society, when this leaves here, and, or some section doesn't leave, and there's something in here that could have prevented a catastrophe in Vermont, that is just, I know it's on your mind, it's on my mind, it's on everybody's mind. At the same time, we want to respect everybody's civil rights without a doubt. So I just want that is,
And.
if I get a call in June
Yep,
and Brian, had this been in here,
Yeah.
this is what would have happened if this didn't happen. That's gonna, of course, devastate everybody involved in this. And I am just putting it out there because I think it's school safety and the culture right now is just hitting us all so hard.
it is, and I think there's also plenty of research and plenty of
Yep.
experts in our state and in our nation that can tell you that no police is going to have prevented a mass shooting. And I think that there is other ways, the way that we're looking at this. Let's give resources to bullying harassment and how we're viewing that. Like, why are we not putting all of our efforts in? A lot of this is mental health breakdowns that happen through school. Like,
Right.
we need to, this is a safety concern that we have been bringing up. There's a council that, you know, is recommending to how that work needs to move forward. Our kids are not doing okay with bullying harassment.
Right.
It's a safety concern, and we need to give it what it deserves.
And I would just, you know,
Yeah.
again, I just want to have this conversation because it's on my mind, it's on my colleagues' minds. We're trying in the legislature to take steps in
Mhm.
those ways. I mean, you've seen a lot of legislation over the past 5 or 6 years to address these things. And it's gonna take a little while for us to get to where we
Yes.
want it to get. I just want, you know, again, if this is removed, you feel as though this would not save lives, section 4, in any way. And I have to be that, I mean, this is
Yeah,
just such a
yeah.
crazy time.
It is a crazy
Okay.
time, and I think there are other ways that can save lives, like gun
Okay.
reform.
Yep.
And like there are ways into the school system.
And we're doing
right?
that, we're trying to do that on one
Yeah.
side. I just want to make sure as we're going it this way, that we're doing everything we can here too.
So yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I think, look, I was a school board member for Montpelier High School. We removed, when I was there, the school resource officers. There was a task force that was created about what does safety look like,
Yeah.
right? What
Yeah.
does safety look like? And for students of color and for other students, it didn't mean to have it. There's like we had one of the best school resource officers because he actually had a master's degree in trauma.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and even then, when they interview students, teacher, parents, administrators, that was not the answer. The answer was like, we need these mental health resources, more psychologists, more. That's what safety meant for people. Now, I think that in your 4 sections, you're looking at security in the smart way. Shut your doors, have these protocols, have this policy. But the answer is not to be spying on our students' social media. That also has lots of reports. I can come up, you give me 3 things, I will find you 10 reports that talks about the implications for civil rights and human rights in those populations. So I think I hopefully, you won't be blaming you for nothing that happened.
Not blame, no, you can just know that.
I'm just like saying,
Yeah.
with my
Yeah.
heart, I think that
We're all speaking from our
we
heart
need
with this one,
to, we need to look our
Yeah.
student safety, starting
Yeah.
from our student safety.
Yeah.
Right, like, what is happening with these students? What are the systems in place that we need to have for them to break down like this?
Yeah.
And what are we doing as a state to say, we got you,
Yeah.
we got you, I'm sorry that this is happening to you,
Yeah.
and you don't need to get there. And that's where I think we need to move.
So we do have testimony here, we'll likely hear from them tomorrow, but Gun Sense Vermont really supports Section 4. So they're saying as a safety piece, again, that they think this kind of thing is important and an important step. But again, we'll hear from them a little bit tomorrow.
Okay.
And it's good to hear this side of things.
And I will send you more resources, and I know that
Yeah.
other people will echo what I have said. Maybe
And
they'll
Ms.
do
Garces,
something.
again, everything we're all just saying, it's just such a complicated, I hope in no way you're feeling like the questions have been in
No.
any way made you uncomfortable or anything like that.
I
I think we're
reckon
all-
with all of it
Yeah.
too, because
Yeah.
but given our sad history.
Yeah.
On both sides,
Yeah.
we need to, I am here to support our students. We see too much discrimination and pain.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like I channel that, I hope.
Any questions for Ms. Garces?
Um,
Any questions? Ms. Garces at this point?
Thank you.
Um, one sec. Mr. Schilling.
So good afternoon. For the record, I'm Falco Schilling. I'm the advocacy director for the ACLU of Vermont. And if at any point you need me to speak up because I have my mask on, please let me know. I have a 1-year-old at home who is bringing home every germ in the world from daycare. So this is almost probably more for you than it is for me. So just for context, the ACLU of Vermont is one of 53 nationwide affiliates of the American Civil Liberties Union, and we work to protect and defend the civil rights and civil liberties of Vermonters. And so we work on a wide range of issues. And so what raised our attention today about this bill, looking very specifically at it, we're looking at the sections, specifically Section 4 sub A. Is the sections of the greatest concern to the ACLU of Vermont, and the requirement that law enforcement members be part of these threat assessment teams. So as Ms. Garces referred to, we are part of a coalition that's been working to try and move law enforcement out of our schools and focus on putting other supports and services for students in those contexts, because largely we see when school resource officers and others are inside of those school environments, youthful behavior becomes overcriminalized. We also see a disproportionate impact of students of color and students with disabilities. So the long and the short of it is, that is our concern, is that by requiring that law enforcement members be part of these assessment teams, that we are going to be one, incentivizing stronger connections between schools and law enforcement. And when you look at the guidance that has been put forward, it specifically envisions school resource officers. And I know that this bill itself does not require any school district or supervisory union to incorporate school resource officers. But when you look at that model, that is what's included in that. So we think that could incentivize more schools to be moving in the direction we think is harmful for a number of students. We also, when looking at the roles of law enforcement within those behavioral assessment teams and looking at the guidance once again, I know that folks have heard that they'll only be involved when there's a criminal threat or there's criminal activity that's happening. But just looking at the guidance that folks would have in front of them, those rules go beyond that. And that includes doing things like helping collect data, particularly through social media, and assisting conducting interviews with subjects, target witnesses, teachers, and staff. So that's of concern to us, that we're going to be asking law enforcement to be surveilling the social media of students who have not actually engaged in criminal behavior at this time, because also within that document, it lists what are the behaviors that should be reported. What is going to raise the level of being reported to this team, which would be required to have a law enforcement officer be part of it. And that includes things like unusual or bizarre communications behavior that seems troubling or disturbing, persons seeming isolated or alienated from others, and persons with unresolved or ongoing grievances with a member of the school community. So as we look at those, those are what the guidance is saying. This should be reported to this team that's required to have a law enforcement official on it. And our concern is, one, that then puts the student on the radar of law enforcement at an early age. And though we know that within this bill it's explicit, these are not going to be used as behavioral, the threat assessments are not being used in a behavioral manner, that the unintended consequences of how that's implemented, or the consequences for students who are identified early and identified to law enforcement, what those might be as they continue to live in the communities and they might have future interactions with law enforcement, how that could perpetuate systemic bias, which exists. And we already know that within our criminal legal system, we have some pretty egregious racial bias that exists, where we lock up people of color, specifically Black people, at 7 times the rate of white people in the state. We also, so these are some of the high-level concerns we have about the requirement that school districts be and supervisory unions be engaging with a team that's required to have a law enforcement officer. So I think if you're looking for a specific language change from us, it would be striking section 4 sub A. I do see that there's value in trying to get more information around the use of these tools and how they've been used in other places. So data collection, and understanding these are happening in other places already. Having more information about how these teams have been working. And then also looking, if the committee is so inclined, looking to see how these models have existed and worked in other places. And if there's a difference between how they've existed and worked with or without law enforcement as members of those threat assessment teams. So I think high level, as I think and I said in our communication, is that we are concerned about that requirement specifically, and then concerned about what the civil rights implications might be for folks when we are using that low bar of non-criminal activity to identify folks to law enforcement that would then have to be put under surveillance.
Senator Williams.
I think I'm the one that has to have that put in there, but it wasn't to physically have them involved in the school. It was to at least have the law enforcement aware of the training that was going on, and maybe have some input into policies and procedures that would include them, so that when they get called to show up for a lockdown or something like that, they at least know that the people inside the schoolhouse know, and as do the law enforcement personnel, what's going to be happening based on what they know. So I don't think it was to have them physically involved inside the schoolhouse. It was just having them involved in planning so that they knew what the planning was.
Well, I think, and I understand your intent, but I think as it's written and as folks are looking at the guidance, if they're seeing this guidance as recommending school resource officers, if you're trying to.
I don't think that's the case at all.
In the OMTEC report.
They have resource officers. I don't think there's any mandate.
There's no mandate
for them to have one. But if the school wants one, and it's part of the team,
so
we set policy. We're not going to tell them.
So I don't think I'm disagreeing with you here. I think what I'm saying is, if these teams are going to be required to exist across the state, and that when they exist, they're required to have a law enforcement officer, and the guidance suggests that school resource officers are the most effective way to implement these teams. As you're someone implementing that plan, that might seem like the way to go. And that's something that's of concern to us. I'm not saying you're mandating it, but I'm saying I think this is how this might play out in the field, and that's of a concern to us. We are going to get into the whole discussion of school resource officers today, but as we moving forward, we feel like that would be further incentivizing, and that's a concern.
Senator Hashim and then Senator Hewitt.
Thank you. So the school to prison pipeline is something that does concern me. And I'm trying to find out or think about what the middle ground might be here. You know, if law enforcement, you know, hypothetically, if law enforcement is removed from subsection A, but you still have school administrators, mental health professionals, or counselors, or even teachers who are then monitoring a kid's social media, or, you know, keeping tabs on them. I mean, is that not of equal concern, or is it of lesser concern because, you know, that, well, obviously they don't have, you know, enforcement power, but they're still able to call law enforcement if they determine that there's a threat. I'm not sure if I articulated that very well, but
That's a good question.
No, I think you articulated that well. And in terms of the concern that I think in a situation like that, you want to make sure that there's strong data sharing agreements in place between educators and law enforcement, and what information is shared, and what are the situations that would rise to the level of putting that person on the radar of law enforcement as a potential threat. I think some of that does happen, but there's also concerns about school administrators doing that same type of surveillance. I need to downplay that concern exists as well, but I think it's a greater concern of law enforcement being asked to actually engage in that type of surveillance.
I think, you know, I mean, one of my concerns as I'm thinking about this, you know, is when an exigent circumstance does arise, a legitimate threat where there could be probable cause for an actual crime that is about to be committed or has been committed. My only concern here is that, you know, school administrators, mental health professionals, they may not have the same understanding of what that crime is, or the elements of the crime, or the probable cause threshold for that crime. And so my only concern is the lag time that comes from a civilian group getting this information, making a determination, and trying to figure out on their own if probable cause has been met, and then transferring it to law enforcement when time could be of the essence. That's my concern, but I also do hear, you know, the other issues where, you know, if, let's say, probable cause isn't met, but you have you know, you have a student who's now on the radar of law enforcement, even if they haven't done anything. So I see the concerns from both angles. Yeah.
Mr. Schilling, is there a middle ground here? Is there a compromise where do you think you and Ms. Garces and we could sort of get you on this, or is it just striking section 4?
I mean, I think our concern is specifically the requirement that the law enforcement official be part of this team. I think the sections that look at gathering more data on the effectiveness of these teams that are already in place in some places
in our schools right now.
Right.
Sure.
It could be helpful before making that a required portion of state law. Also, nothing in this bill actually would prohibit any sort of coordination with law enforcement. You know, nothing we're proposing actually prohibits that. If there's a real and imminent threat, it would require a lot of schools to reach out to law enforcement to try and prevent harm. So,
right, to pick up the phone. Yeah. Senator Bueller.
Yes, as someone who's worked in schools and lived this reality on a regular basis, I was going to say, I do feel as though these folks are already doing this work.
For these administrators.
I mean, yeah, there are teams of people working in schools right now who are very much sort of tuned into child behavior, teen behavior. A lot of times there are relationships that are, you know, long standing. So they, you know, they can see and respond to a variety of behaviors. Clearly, though, we're trying to address a problem that folks feel, I don't know exactly where this is coming from, where the genesis of this is, other than obviously we have had tragic instances of violence in our country, but I guess I'm just struggling to know what problem we're trying to solve, other than you know, violence in our schools, which often come from without and not necessarily from within. And I'm just in a place right now of some discomfort around you know, we're assuming that folks in schools aren't already doing a lot of this work, and they are. So, and I hear you about police officers, because we've been talking about SROs for years, and, you know, the problematic nature of that relationship. So, you know, would removing law enforcement from section 4 put us in a place where we all feel relatively comfortable, I guess is the question. And I know some of us are shaking their heads no, and I think we're gonna be taking more testimony, so that might.
Yeah, we'll take some more testimony, but I think, I'm looking, Ms. Garces, do you mind if I pull you back into the conversation?
Sure.
You sure? So you can stay right there unless you want to come up,
No.
whatever works best for you. But you propose we strike the entire section, and Mr. Schilling is saying they're comfortable with removing the law enforcement piece. Could you just tell us a little bit about how would you feel if we did that and still collected the data? I think Senator Gulick's, well, first of all, yeah, absolutely right. Well, there already are a bunch of behavioral threat assessment teams out there working in the state, and some informal. So it's not as though we'd be taking this huge different step. The big step I do think is adding the police officers. And the genesis of this, just to bring us back, because I know we've been back and forth a little bit, this was an idea that was proposed by the administration. We've changed it a lot. And really it's part of the overall school safety and sort of Vermont's safety plan, making sure, I don't want to speak for the administration. Again, you've all heard my piece and I know we all share it. You want to drop a kid off, go to work, whatever it is, you want to just make sure you're safe. We want to make sure we're safe here. We want to make sure everybody's safe. So that's kind of, and you know, Senator Gulick, I could see, you know, somebody could say, well, this, and I agree, it has to be multi-pronged without a doubt. What I think we all agree with also is this is mental health, this is bullying, this is people feeling left behind in society, this is racism, this is, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on out there. And yet still, it seems to me that we want to take some action, again, for some consistency throughout the state to make sure that kids are also safe. So that's sort of where my thoughts are. Senator Gulick.
Can we take testimony from, I don't know exactly who would be the BPA or the BSA, someone who represents teachers, principals, et cetera, on what does happen now when there is a threat that is identified? I think law enforcement is consulted when there are fairly significant issues that seem to be troubling. So, I mean, I think that already happens. I don't think it happens a lot, but I think it can happen. It's not as if law enforcement is completely excluded from when something rises to a certain level. But I don't like the idea of sort of them bringing them into this process personally.
Senator Williams.
I spoke to a principal in my district Monday, and we spoke about this bill, and he highlighted what they're already doing. They're already doing a lot of this. They have one RSO. He's not wearing, you know, vests and firearms. He's in there. He works with the children, and they share him between 3 different schools in that district. So he's in there. He's already a part of it. It's not like he's out there with, you know, guns and badges and handcuffs. He's a part of the team. I think he's actually part of the sheriff. And I mean, if they're already doing it, I don't want to tell them you got to change the way you're doing it if it's working. Maybe we ought to get that principal to come in and testify.
Well, I did just ask Hayden we did hear from the V's early on with this, but it has changed. So I just asked Hayden to reach out to Jay Nichols to see if he might be able to be available to talk to us a little bit. Senator Hashim.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the same points as when it comes to hearing more about this. Senator Gulick and both Senator Williams just touched on it. And I think that, you know, finding out what folks are doing now, I think would would definitely be helpful as we decide whether or not to leave it in or take it out.
Yeah, sorry, before you respond to the
Yes,
question about our
yes.
position, I just wanted to clarify our position so that you
Yeah.
actually,
Please.
and so I think when we're looking at this,
Yes,
the concern is all of sub A, the overall requirement that these teams be placed in every
Okay.
supervisory union and with every independent school. Though within sub A, if they are existing, I think the training requirements are good. And so I think if that's helpful in terms of clarification,
Mhm.
no, not requiring it in every school district, but if they are there, making sure they have training annually and an implicit bias, and then we collect data on the effectiveness before considering whether that's a mandatory move that should be happening across the state. So I think that to clarify our position, hopefully that's helpful, clarify your.
yeah, it's very helpful. So really what, in my apologies, you did say that, and I hope I didn't misrepresent.
No, I think I
your
was
statement.
unclear.
No, you weren't. To actually, so take some time in section 4, make it, data collection, see what's happening out there, collect, understand some of the things that we put in subsection D, reporting data related to completion of and outcomes for those that are using behavioral assessment and manifestation determination reviews, and reporting those back to the agency. So that's a possibility. So as I'm seeing it, just for those watching at home, 1, we keep it as is. 2, we make some, remove section A, which would move this section into a data collection piece before taking a next step. And then there is the third option, which would perhaps just remove law enforcement involvement. So I think that's sort of where those are the 3, as is, data collection for that section, and 4 would be law enforcement. Senator, please.
One other question that's a
Yeah.
little bit of an aside, but have the folks in the room looked at the emergency operations plan? Have you all looked at that? Because that, there's a whole section 2 is about the plans, and there is a template that exists at the schools, Vermont School Safety Center. It might be helpful for folks to take a look at that as well.
I haven't reviewed that yet, but
What's that?
is that I've read the guidance for the behavioral assessment. I believe that's a different document. Yeah, I have not reviewed that.
Anything else? Oh, yes. Ms.
So then
Dawson.
I confused, I'm like,
Please.
okay. So I think that when you name it, the behavioral threat assessment, it's already kind of linked to the guidance that the agency is doing that has all these things and what about shifting it to like it's safety, like it's so that you're looking at data, you can still do the same, but you're not really linking it to the threat assessment. And yes, so you had a Williston principal come and
That's
testify
right. That's right.
last week. He started by saying that they have a safety team that has the principals, that has the counselors, more so, and then they added this threat assessment team with the rollout from the agency. And I think that there is, questions around bias, and these trainings are not, like we do the implicit bias trainings, and for many people it's just a check box. And so we have also the fair and impartial policing policy, which I chair the FIP subcommittee in the state, and right now we're currently looking at, and as a requirement, they have these biennial trainings that they have to do, these teams. But so like if you start by looking at this from the safety perspective and looking at what is it that we need to answer, in a couple of years you can increase that understanding and not do it like this. So, and I think Rachel Seelig had specific recommendations about the training and about how, and I have it right here, to provide additional resources to improve the training and technical assistance to districts in order to ensure that Rule 4000 is followed, and to expand the use of manifestation determination review requirements that already exist, right? And that's like to ensure that we're not pulling together the kids who are always marginalized and who are the ones that are gonna be, that we are advocating here for. So I think that shifting that question around threat assessment to safety assessment. To safety
Asking
assessment,
to
that,
arrive, thank you,
Having to be in house ed is really good.
Yours, Bernie?
all good stuff. So what I think we should do, committee, is we should ask, or we will take a 20-minute break, and we will ask Ms. Garces, Mr. Schilling, and as well as Ms. Seelig, who I believe is on Zoom, just so we have something in front of us that you all feel comfortable with. And Ms. Barbic may also want to participate. So I'm wondering if we could do that. If we, just so we have something in front of us so we can make a decision as it relates to section 4. And Mr. Schilling, if you would review the question that Ms. Gulick, Senator Gulick has regarding the template during that time.
20 minutes?
20 minutes. Okay? I know you can do it. Okay?
Well, it's 42 pages long, but.
Oh, no, he just needs to look at it.
Right.
I think he'll just have,
He'll have
he'll
to
have a
read it or
sense. He will,
understand it.
he'll be able to do it. Ms. Seelig, unfortunately, you cannot use this Zoom for this conversation, but you can call your colleagues and you can all feel free to use the cafeteria, and we do this sometimes. So you come back and give us some information, okay?
Right.
And that you-
Rachel, would you send us a Zoom?
Yeah, I'll send you a Zoom right now.
Okay.
Great, we'll see you
Thank
back
You
here
know, you know where to find it,
3:30.
Vermont School Safety Center.
Can you wait one second? So, just so I can say, this, Mr. Nichols, one of the things we're trying to figure out here is section 4 of the school safety bill.
I haven't even looked at it in a while.
Well,
Yeah, so Senator Gulick has a specific question, I think.
Yeah. Our question, Mr. Nichols, is what is currently happening in a school? If there is, if teachers notice that a student's behaving strangely or erratically, what kind of process is there? And is law enforcement ever brought in to deal with the situation? Or not even to deal with the situation, but if someone is perceived to be a threat, is law enforcement contacted?
Yes. I mean,
Those are the
the short answer is
questions that
often
we
they
have.
are. So if there's a credible threat that if it were true, could lead to like a worry about a violent thing with a gun or a weapon or something like that. Usually, there's most, I think every school district has a threat behavioral assessment team.
Yeah, we think most do. This
Yeah.
mandates it, but
Yeah.
yeah. we think
And it
most
may look
have it,
different in
yeah.
different places,
Yep.
and it won't always be that the police officer or the school resource
Yep.
officer might be involved. But if it's a situation where it looks like there's a viable threat that could be of a violent nature,
Yeah,
then that person would almost assuredly be part of that conversation. Guidance counselor, principal, there might be like a SAP counselor that's part of that, might be a classroom teacher or two, depending on somebody that knows the kid. And that group would come together, and the threat assessment team doesn't look exactly the same
sure.
for every incident, but each school district has one. Does that help at all?
It does, it
Okay.
does. And
Okay.
yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
And Senator Gulick, does it help you?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
police are contacted when there's
Yeah.
reason to believe that there's a threat or a danger.
Absolutely. We're not experts in that
Yeah.
kind of stuff,
Right.
so we want to make sure.
And I think it's probably different schools, different things happen.
I was gonna bring this up, but I probably should bring it up now. I was involved with the situation at Fairhaven,
Yeah.
and they had a resource officer, and he had a close working relationship with the local police department.
Uh-huh.
And if it hadn't been for those people exchanging information,
Yeah.
it was over social media that somebody turned this young man in. That's why I thought we should have at least them to be aware of the training that these people are doing in the school. The other thing was that just 6 months ago, in my hometown, there was a lockdown at Holy High School because next door, there was a drug operation. And there were police cars, blue lights, and the principal didn't know what was going on. But he knew he had to lock down. But nobody in the town government knew. And it's because we don't have that communication link. This could help to improve that link. heightened. So that's why I asked to put it in there.
But that was a big issue. The principal called me, he was very upset.
He was.
He was like, he didn't even know it was happening. And that should not have happened.
So, yeah,
But
that's
it's
why I
right
said,
next to the school almost.
it was the next house over. I said, so, and that's why the emergency management coordinator in each town should be aware of what's going on in the school too. That way they can let people within the town government know, because that's usually a missing link. But anyway,
And where were we on the record?
You were still on the record.
Jay Nichols, Vermont Principals
Yeah.
Association.
Yeah.
For the record.
Wow, thank you.
Y'all set with me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we're gonna be back in touch though before we take a
Don't
vote
don't
tomorrow.
hesitate.